Welcome to Focus on Abilities, a program about issues affecting the lives of people with disabilities. My name is Lex Frieden. I'll be your host for today's program. I'm professor at the University of Texas Health Science Center at Houston, and I direct the Independent Living Research Utilization Program at TIER Memorial Hermann. Today we have a very interesting show, and one that's going to be important for you, particularly in the season of the year when we have hurricanes, but also throughout the year when people are subject to being involved in disasters that they hadn't planned on being involved in. So our guest today, I'll introduce him right after this break, but first I want you to ask yourself one question, and we'll answer it before the end of today's program. What number do you call before disaster occurs to register for assistance in the case you need it after a disaster? We'll answer that question before the end of today's program. Right now, please stay tuned. We'll be right back with Focus on Abilities.
Focus on Abilities is brought to you by TIER Memorial Hermann, redefining rehabilitation, removing barriers, re-enabling independence. In the ILRU Southwest ADA Center, promoting compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act.
You're watching Focus on Abilities. I'm Lex Frieden, and we have with us today a very important gentleman for those of you who require information about disasters. Francisco Sanchez is our guest today. Mr. Sanchez, welcome to Focus on Abilities.
Thank you for having me.
Now, you are with the Harris County Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparation, Emergency Management.
Yes, sir.
Your job there, I guess, is communications, right?
Yes, and Harris County is a large and diverse place. We've got 1,777 square miles, 4.1 million residents, 34 cities, 154 police departments, more than 60 fire departments. So we are an interesting landscape to do emergency management and homeland security in.
Absolutely. The challenges of coordinating within that larger space and with so many players must be phenomenal.
It is. The coordination is really the most important part. If someone calls 911, they really don't care who answers the phone. They want someone with a badge and a gun. They don't care if it's a sheriff, a deputy, or a constable. If they need a fire truck or an EMS person, they don't care what department it is. They get dial 911. They expect somebody to be there and provide the service. Emergency management is no different than that. We all need to be able to work together, and we try to do that very well. For this particular hurricane season, we've already had our annual meeting with all the elected officials and emergency management coordinators. We had more than 40 elected officials come together with their emergency management coordinators, the state, local, and federal government, to make sure that we provide the best service we can to the residents, no matter where they live.
You know, I've always been curious about that. In most management structures, there's a kind of a hierarchy. It's not clear to me sometimes where the hierarchy leads in emergency management. Sometimes you hear that the governor has made one determination and the city officials have made another determination. Who actually, at the level of the consumer, is in charge?
Right. Well, first, all disasters are local. We appreciate the support from the state and the federal government. We certainly have great relationships with them, and they're there when we need them. But all disasters are local. So the state law says that the director for Homeland Security and Emergency Management is the chief elected official. So in Harris County, that would be Harris County Judge Emmett. In the city of Houston, that would be the mayor, which is Mayor Anise Parker. And so every city mayor and every county judge is in charge for that. So that said, they can't make those decisions necessarily all on their own. To make successful decisions that do the best possible job for residents, they need to coordinate closely with all the emergency response partners. They need to have the best information possible, and that takes a team effort. But at the end of the day, those tough decisions rest with the emergency management coordinator and the chief elected official for that jurisdiction.
And during a disaster, public officials work closely together, well coordinated, as you said. And some of the emergency responders who one might think would appear in a local area actually could be from another area, simply due to the way people are used in disaster and the way they are structured and the way they're sent to solve certain problems. So
Right.
if somebody in Harris County, out in the county, not in the city, finds a problem and reports it, they may be serviced by somebody from another jurisdiction.
Correct. We have something called mutual aid. During a disaster, resources become scarce. That's probably the definition of a disaster is local resources become overwhelmed. One of the things that came out of 9/11 was the National Incident Management System. That means that I can be on a team to deployment for something that would happen in New York, Boston, Chicago, Miami, and I would know how that organization is going to work, how that structure works, depending on what happens. We're all trained the same to follow that command structure. How it applies locally is we have mutual aid. So, it may be a fire department responding to you that you're not familiar with after a disaster, but it's that kind of teamwork, putting the resources where they're needed. And if you're in a community that's particularly overwhelmed by a disaster, chances are you'll be having surrounding communities, other parts from either the city or the county, or even surrounding counties coming in and providing that emergency relief for you.
Interesting. Now, being in Houston and Harris County and this part of Texas, I guess most of us are conditioned to expect hurricanes. And
Right.
when we think about disasters, those are the disasters we think of first. But we've seen lately fires in Bastrop. We've seen an explosion in North Texas. We've seen other disasters that are equally as threatening to life and safety as a hurricane.
Right.
So does the Department of Homeland Security, the Office of Emergency Management, concern itself with other types of disasters besides hurricanes?
Definitely. Hurricane season runs from June 1st to November 30th, which is 6 months out of the year. But there are so many other disasters that we respond to on a daily basis and prepare for on a daily basis. We take an all hazards approach. Tornadoes is something that, while not a high risk here, is something we have to be prepared for. Flooding. We're in the middle of a drought right now where we have seriously dry conditions. Not as bad as 2011, but we saw the wildfires that happened in 2011, and those were a relatively new scenario for many people here that weren't here during the 1950s and saw that rash of wildfires. You don't think of the nation's fourth largest city as subject to wildfires, but we can find ourselves in that situation. Power outages, pandemics, civil unrest, all those kinds of things are categories of disasters that we have to prepare for and plan for. And the more we prepare for an all hazards approach, the better off we're going to be. And that's also from the citizen perspective as well.
I know that we have typically some knowledge that there's a hurricane in the Gulf.
Right.
I've been told that we're not always sure where it's going to make landfall, even up until the hours just before it does so. But other kinds of disasters we don't know about hours and days ahead of time.
Right.
And those must be more difficult to plan for and to prepare for.
There are hurricanes, as you mentioned, give us a little bit of lead time. Sometimes they give us a week, sometimes they give us a few days, sometimes they give us a day, but the fact is hurricanes and tropical storms generally give us some kind of notice. But we do have the spontaneous type of events. Tornadoes, even though we know we might have severe weather, by the time you know there's a tornado and get that alert, chances are it's already near you, and that's sort of spontaneous. We live near the ship channel, so we have the potential for a chemical release or industrial accident that can happen, and those obviously happen spontaneously. Those can also happen on our freeways. Power disruptions can occur pretty quickly as well without a whole bunch of notice. So all those kinds of things we need to prepare for. And one of the things that wildfires brought for us in 2011 was the realization that we talk about evacuations around hurricanes and having that plenty of notice. But there are some disasters that we need to keep in mind. Evacuations, we can't be pushing that back in our minds as residents. If we have a wildfire or a chemical incident and there's someone knocking at your door saying the time to evacuate is now, if you can't walk out with your kit, if you can't walk away with the things that you have already set aside or know are important to you, you're going to have to leave them behind because you need to leave then. So evacuation is not something that we always just try to talk around in the hurricane context because there are times when you need to evacuate immediately.
Well, it's evident that your office actually spends a lot of time preparing and planning what to do in different scenarios. But I'm not sure people, despite the fact that we should be conditioned to do so, are as good at preparing and being ready to move in a moment's notice. Right. I'd like to discuss that a little bit, but before we do, I'm going to take a break here. So sure. I want to thank you all for watching here today. We have a very important subject, a great guest to talk about emergency preparation, and we'll do that right after this break from Focus on Abilities. Please stay tuned. Thanks for staying with us through the break. We are here today talking about disaster preparedness, and we've got an expert to help us learn about that. Mr. Sanchez from the Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Management at Harris County. Francisco, we as citizens have a responsibility ourselves to be prepared. We can't simply depend on the local officials to right. protect us and to respond in case of disaster. We're not going to have somebody come and bail us out every time we have a problem, and particularly if there's a mass event where a lot of people are affected at the same time. What should people do to be prepared all the time?
Well, that's an excellent point. No matter how good our plans are, the cornerstone of an effective Homeland Security and emergency management strategy is public preparedness, and everyone having their own plan and being able to respond to a disaster. So there are essentially 4 things that you can do to be prepared for any type of disaster, whether it's a hurricane or anything else. One is to have a plan. Know whether you live in an evacuation zone or not, if we're talking about hurricanes, knowing how you're going to communicate with your family or your loved ones or your employer if something should happen, and knowing the neighborhood you live in and the neighborhood you work in, so you know what threats are there. Are you close to a bayou? Are you close to a plant? Those kinds of things are important to know. Having a kit, making sure that you have enough food, water, medicine to sustain yourself for at least a week. So you have that. You know, when I give advice to people, a lot of folks will go and try to create this box at home where they've got 10 days worth of food, and it can be pricey, it can be cumbersome. You know, most people, if they look around their home, will find that they have some extra food, things they can live off of. It's just a matter of going into your pantry, going in your kitchen, making sure that you have that available, and knowing what you need to stock up on. Making sure if water is going to be an issue, you know, save your milk jug so that you can do that. Save those kinds of containers that you can have. The other is to be informed. Pay attention to the news. You can sign up for alerts either from Harris County or the city's Office of Emergency Management. You can watch the news. You know, if there's severe weather, keep in touch with that. Sign up for breaking news alerts. There's all this information out there that's being pushed out to the public. Follow social media. Just always stay informed, particularly during hurricane season. You should at least watch TV or your favorite radio or news outlet to see if there's anything forming in the Gulf. And then also be involved. An involved community is a prepared community, and it's a safer community. Know your neighbors. Know what resources are around you. And there's also training out there to be involved in community emergency response teams, so people can be active in that. We have teams that are tailored for persons with disabilities, so that they can be involved in their communities and can protect themselves as well. Only 1% of our population is first responders. Yeah. So that means the other 99% are generally going to have to find a way to fend for themselves until a responder can get there in an emergency. But resources are going to be overwhelmed. So that personal plan, that personal preparedness is really what's going to keep you safe.
Well, you talk about planning and planning at the individual level, but you also said that planning at the macro level involves all hazards preparation. Right. And yet, when we talk about individual preparation in the Houston area and the Gulf Coast, we think, again, mostly about hurricanes because right. I suppose those are the most frequent threats to us. But we have seen recently other threats, and I wonder what advice you might give people in terms of adapting their personal plans for hazards other than hurricanes, where we do have the opportunity to run to the store maybe a few hours before landfall.
Well, I think the most important lesson that some of the most recent disasters have brought to us, whether it has been a tornado, an explosion, any of those things are a very real reminder that any day, at any moment, we could have a spontaneous disaster. We are not always going to have the time to run to the grocery store and to the hardware store or somewhere else to get those supplies. We need to know how we're going to charge our batteries for our radio, for our durable medical equipment, how we're going to be able to contact people, knowing how to text or having an alternative way to communicate with people aside from picking up your cell phone, because those things get jammed during a mass event. So the biggest thing I think that the recent disasters are a reminder for us that they can happen anytime, and we really need to be prepared to act pretty quickly and have that supply kit and those resources available for us at a moment's notice.
Now, the other thing I want to remind our viewers about, particularly those who are people with disabilities, family members and others, is that when we talk about preparing to maintain for some days after a disaster occurs, people with disabilities, chronic health conditions, and seniors may actually be taking medications. They shouldn't depend on being able to get those medications refilled. Right. Most insurance companies, Medicare has a program where you can ask to have an emergency supply of medications, and they will provide you with a prescription that enables you to be able to save some supplies that are durable medical supplies, others that need to be refreshed. And that leads me to another question. When we talk about these food boxes and people putting everything away, they have to remember to refresh some of those goods, right?
Exactly. Some of those expire, and so obviously we don't recommend eating expired food, but that's kind of the point I sort of try to make about people. Some people will create this box and they'll create this kit, and that's traditionally what people think about when we talk about having a kit, but that's why I talk about look in your pantry, organize things so you can take a visual assessment every day. Am I running low on something? You know, it's I forget what the term is, but last in, last out. So put the newer stuff in the back, rotate your pantry so that you're consuming what you need, but you're not going through them too quickly. A couple of important things to talk about for persons with some disabilities is you hit on some very important points. Most of those batteries for equipment you can't run to the store and replace. You need to try to have a way to charge that. Always try to have a couple of extra batteries if you have them charged for those kinds of things. For medicines, that's very important. Yeah. If Medicaid has that program, take advantage of it now. If you happen to be in a situation where you have excellent medical insurance and you can order your 3 supply refills at a discount, a lot of insurance companies do that. Do that. One, it's cheaper for you, but then you're also prepared with plenty of medicines should you need to do that. So keep those things in mind. What do you need, and understand that it's easier to do it now before we actually face a disaster.
We'll talk more about preparation for people with disabilities. I want to stay tuned, please. We're going to be right back with more from Francisco Sanchez. Disaster preparedness and response is the subject we're talking about on Focus on Abilities today. And we have with us Francisco Sanchez, who's an expert on the subject matter. Francisco, we talked about preparations by people with disabilities. I think anything you say could be applied to the general population. We've also talked about the fact that we have to be ready for any kind of a disaster to occur. One thing that confuses people more than anything else, I think, is the question of whether when disaster occurs they run or flee, and whether they stay and hunker down. And people have been confused about that forever, as long as I can remember. Right. But there are some kind of general principles, are there not?
Yes. First, let's start with the obvious one, which is hurricanes. Most of the people in this region need to shelter in place for a hurricane. The communities that need to evacuate are generally along the coast, and it's storm by storm basis. So if you need to evacuate, we will let you know by zip code. Everyone knows their zip code. If you don't have it, you can go get your piece of mail today or junk mail and know what your zip code is. So listen to your emergency management officials. If they tell you for you to evacuate, do so as soon as possible. For almost any other type of an emergency, it's really case-by-case basis. So it's really important to listen to your elected officials and your emergency managers, whether it's any other type of disaster, whether you should stay in place or whether you should evacuate. If you are told that you don't need to evacuate, staying in place is so important because we need to let those people in harm's way get out of the way first And for those of us that are not in danger, should really stay off the roads, stay in our homes, and let public safety officials do their jobs.
So when we think about preparation, we often think first about preparing to leave. We need to have a bag that we can take with us that maybe has a soft pillow and has all our pills and other things that we can carry with us if we have to leave in a hurry. But we're not always as well prepared, I think, for disasters where we do have to hunker down. And I think people need to remember that they need to have duct tape to tape windows in case there's a chemical spill or something of that nature. They need to have things that can keep them safe and comfortable at home for an extended period of time, and they need to be prepared to stay there without electricity. You mentioned that for people who have medical needs that require electricity. You need to solve that problem now. You can't wait until something happens and then expect somebody to deliver a generator. I can speak from personal experience. There are solutions. You can go to Fry's Electronics and purchase a system that you can set up in the backyard and uses solar power to charge batteries. There are many different possibilities. I would not recommend stocking a lot of batteries because that can be dangerous as well. But whatever your situation is, make sure that you plan for it. And if you have difficulty planning, if you're not sure what to do, then people can help you. Francisco, what do you recommend in that case? If somebody has a complex situation, they need some advice from a pro, where would they call?
They can go to ready.gov and get an abundance of information. A very important local resource on the internet is togetheragainsttheweather.com and .org. It is designed specifically for persons with functional and access needs that gives them excellent tips on how to prepare. You know, like I said, you mentioned medications. It gives advice like those milk gallon jugs. Stock those, put water in them, freeze them, keep them in your freezer. If your medication requires a certain temperature, you already have that ready to go, and they make an excellent way to be able to keep your medication at a certain temperature. They also can provide you a video, and it's also available in American Sign Language. You can order that video, they'll send it to you, and you can watch it. It's in multiple languages and in American Sign Language, and it's also captioned at the bottom. You can go to readyhoustontx.gov and order another video that is more general market and for the general population, but so many lessons to be learned there. And again, also multiple languages, also in American Sign Language, and also captioned. So there's all those resources that are out there, and that's available for people to get some advice.
One other website that I'll mention that we maintain at ILRU is disability911.org, which actually has links to the other sites you've mentioned and may have some additional resources as well. I guess we need to know what to do if we think we might need help during a disaster, because obviously everybody may need help, but people with mobility impairments and other disabilities may be at the greatest risk after a disaster has occurred. Can they do anything to notify public officials that they will need help?
Yes, one thing they can do right now is dial 211. And by dialing 211, it is a confidential registry where you report information that you might need help during a disaster, whether you need help evacuating, whether you might not be able to sustain yourself, and it's for every range. I know, for example, my grandmother can do an excellent job of driving around the neighborhood, but she lives in an evacuation zone. She cannot drive for 5 or 6 hours to the destination, so she's registered with 211. So it is something to be proactive. Call 211 now, register your information, and if you are ever, that information then gets shared with their emergency management officials so that they can look that up. If we have any type of incident, they can research that database and see if you might need help, and they will know to be able to reach out to you proactively and let you know as well.
Yeah, that's very important. The 211 issue, I mean, people who are watching this show who may have concerns need to call and register with 211. And if you did it last year, do it again. They clean those lists each year, so you need to register each year with 211. And it's important people don't do it. Unfortunately, they wait until just hours before they think a disaster might occur, and those lines are no longer available to them. So we don't want to be backing up 911 with issues that could be dealt with ahead of time. So please call the 211 number. And let me just say this. We have, according to the demographics in the Houston, Galveston area, about 1 million people with disabilities. We know from Metrolift that there are at least 20,000 people in the Houston area that are registered for special transportation. And yet, at the heart of the biggest disaster that we've had recently prior to Hurricane Ike, there were only 10,000 people in this area registered for 211. None of those people lost their lives. They were all helped if they needed it. But there may have been people who should have had assistance who didn't plan for it or register ahead of time. So please do call 211, and I think the number would be better at 40,000, 50,000, or 100,000 than at 10, and you need to be part of that solution too. Francisco, thank you so much for being on Focus on Abilities today. This
Thank you for having me, Lex.
Really been enlightening, I think, for everyone, and I hope you'll come back and talk more about the kinds of things that people can do to be prepared and what they do after disaster.
Glad to.
So with that, we need to know that be prepared, call 211 and register. Be ready to hunker down or leave, whichever the case may be. Important to pay attention to the communications you get and register for every kind of communications you can get, but listen to the public authorities because they will have the ultimate word about whether to go or stay. Thank you all so much for watching Focus on Abilities today. I think this is an important subject for everybody. I hope you've enjoyed the program, and please join us next time. My name is Lex Frieden, and again, thanks for watching.
Focus on Abilities is brought to you by Tier Memorial Hermann, redefining rehabilitation, removing barriers, re-enabling independence. In the ILRU Southwest ADA Center, promoting compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act.